praise and pushback these days for Governor Gavin Newsom following his two-day tour of rural South Carolina. That tour, hosted by that state's Democratic Party, and it was designed to rally Democrats ahead of next year's midterms. But some suspect that Mr. Newsom also gauging interest in a possible 2028 White House run. We're joined once again by veteran LA Times political writer Seema Mehta. Seema, thank you for being with us. You've covered the governor for a long, long time. What's your take on his trip to South Carolina?
Well, I mean, I think there are very few governors or higher up elected officials who don't necessarily look in the mirror every morning and see a potential president. So I don't think that the speculation about him possibly running, especially when you show up in states like South Carolina, that speculation totally makes sense. But what he plans to do is also, I think, a really big open question.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Newsom also met with Congressman James Clyburn. They call him a kingmaker in Democratic politics in a state that is essentially on the road to the White House. Clyburn referred to Newsom as a quote unquote presidential candidate, saying he's an effective messenger of the party. So what do you make of that? I mean,
Clyburn he's so influential in Democratic politics in general, but in South Carolina in particular. And if you recall, in 2020, his work for Biden in South Carolina at a time where things were a little iffy for the former president, but then the Democratic hopeful nominee before he clinched the nomination. Clyburn's work for Biden was such a key to Biden being able to win the nomination.
There is some pushback, though, Seema, as we mentioned before. The Washington Post is writing there are concerns over a Californian being in the White House. And some state Republicans are accusing him of ditching his day job. What do you think?
I mean, it's Democrats in California are different than Democrats in states like Michigan or Iowa or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. So I do think there is a question about how Governor Newsom will play in states like that. I mean, he might appeal to the Democratic base. Like when he's trying to get out voters for the midterm elections, that might work. But more broadly, I think that, if you go to states like Arizona, Nevada, Texas, it's like, don't California my Texas, don't California my Arizona. There is a real thing about California in a number of these states. I mean, and this far predates Governor Newsom. I mean, with Pelosi, with many, many people, because our states, policies have been more liberal than Democrats in other states. So I think there's a real question about how he plays, especially in some of those Midwestern states and some of these Western states that are going to be key to electing the next president.
So Governor Newsom and his team have really ramped up their social media attacks in the past few weeks. It's more aggressive. It's more snarky, almost as if Newsom is adopting the Trump posture, if you will, when it comes to social media. Is this, do you think, maybe part of a broader strategy that we're not seeing?
I mean, I think he's always been sort of pretty aggressive on social media, as has his team. And then, he launched his podcast and he sort of got some heat in Democratic quarters for some of the people he had on his podcast, like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon. So I am not entirely sure what's going on here, but it's a weird sort of trajectory of events that but also California has clearly been under attack by the Trump administration, whether it's the ICE raids or the lawsuits. So there's one filed today, and there's been many filed. So it could be a reaction to that, but he has been on an interesting trajectory in terms of how he deals with the administration and how he publicly deals with the administration.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. He has been incredibly vocal in recent weeks, pushing back against the Trump administration. What about the immigration raids, that big, beautiful bill as well? Are they impacting his future?
I mean, I think the state's budget is not great. And that's something that he's going to have to deal with for the next 2 years. And that's something that whoever our next governor is going to have to deal with for the next 2 years. And that has such a broad impact on whether it's people on Medicaid, or Medi-Cal as we call it, or, Planned Parenthood defunding, which obviously federal money doesn't go to abortion, but it does go for reproductive care, cancer screenings, STI screenings, mammograms, all that kind of stuff. And 1/3 of Planned Parenthood's patients are in California, the most of any state. So the big beautiful bill, it is going to have a very disproportionate impact on the residents of the state.
Governor Newsom wraps up his term in about 17 months, nearly 2 years before the 2028 election. So what do you see as his next move? South Carolina, the last couple of days, where is he going next?
Well, I mean, the question is, I mean, Iowa, I guess, doesn't matter anymore, sadly, because I love Iowa. So it doesn't matter anymore in Democratic circles. So Nevada, New Hampshire, I mean, I think watching his travel will be very telling. Seeing who he talks to will be very telling. But he has, even before all of this, he was making a point of really calling out Republican legislators and governors in other states. Like if you recall, he had a debate with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a couple years ago, and so this is not necessarily new. And I think he's always sort of over the years, many years, he's liked sort of poking the other side, but he's also liked. Sort of trying to defy traditions. Like, when he wrote his book Citizenville, one of the quotes on the book sleeve is from Newt Gingrich, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, and they did an event together. So his career is not. I think if you look at it from across the country, you're like, oh, liberal, Governor Newsom from California, but his career has actually been sort of more interesting than that.
We know that former Vice President Harris is considering the run for the governor's mansion, not the White House quite yet, but the governor's mansion. Any indication that Newsom is going to back her in that move?
I mean, he can't run for governor again. I question whether he will actually. I mean, if she jumps in, she's largely expected to become a front runner. Yeah. And they have a long-term relationship. I mean, they started their political careers in San Francisco. They were friends, like they've known each other forever. But they also had a bit of a rivalry. And we saw that when Senator Boxer announced that she was retiring in 2015, I believe. And there was sort of a debate about would Newsom go for it when he was lieutenant governor, or would Kamala Harris go for it? The former vice president ultimately went for it, while Newsom decided to run for governor. So there's a friendship, but also a rivalry there. So it's interesting. But he also has relationships with a number of the other people who are running. Like, his lieutenant governor is among the people who is running. Former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Virgos, although they've had their battles over the years, is running. So Javier Becerra, the former AG and the former, Secretary of Health and Human Services, is running. So he has relationships with a number of people. But I think the question is, if the former vice president enters the field, what does that do to the field? Like, who actually drops out, who does not?
Yeah. And there's also talk that maybe Rick Caruso could enter as well. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think the question is, does he run for office again? B, if he does he run for governor, or does he run for mayor?
Very good. Yeah. Seema Mehta, it's so nice to see you. Thanks for joining us this evening. Political writer for the Los Angeles Times. We appreciate you.